Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we are talking about production design. I am a filmmaker. I work with a lot of production designers, and we have a production designer guest with us here today to talk a little bit about his process, how he got into the industry, how he works things. If you like this content, please don't forget to subscribe, click the bell notification, and also share with all your friends, family, and people in the film industry. Got it. All right, let's check out our guest now.
Hi, my name's Noam Piper. I'm a production designer for film and TV.
Can you tell us a little bit about what it is you do and how you came into the industry? Your beginnings, basically, your background, what you had studied, and what got you to this point, what drew you to the industry?
So I'm a production designer, and that means, so in a way, we're sort of like interpreters. You get a script, a piece of paper with words on it, and you have to translate that script into a visual world. And then you have to actualize that physically. So that's what I do. How did I get into the industry? It's a good question. Am I in the industry? I always loved film as a child. I don't think there's anything particularly special there. What may be a bit different with my background is the fact that both of my parents are designers, neither of which for film. They sort of very much come from an industrial and product design world. But I've always had, from the earlier stage, I've always been drawing and sort of creative. So I, soon discovered the amazing world of films, and particularly more complex films as I grew later into my teenage years, and went to film school. So I went through a very sort of straight route about it. Went to film school, which is a very practical based school where we actually made short films. We tried our hands at all sorts of things. We did everything from editing on film and old Steenbecks, and filming and lighting and doing a bit of sound. And that's where I sort of really started designing short films. From then, upon graduation, school did not sort of supply me with an incredible platform or contacts in the industry. All of that had to be sort of discovered alone. And I did whatever I could to start working on anything and with anyone that would essentially take me. So in my case, I started working, right at the bottom of the food chain, joining art departments on low budget films, working in any capacity that I could. So I tried my hand at everything from props assisting, from doing a bit of set dressing, to standby, art directing. And the more you work, the greater your contact pool gets broader, your knowledge gets broader, your reputation does as well. So about 8 years of working on a mix of low budget feature films and a mix of commercials, which tend to have considerably higher budgets, in various capacities. Primarily as an art director, I decided it was time to go at it alone and to try and work my way as a designer.
But go back to that first job that you got. How did you get that job? Because I know there are a lot of people who knock on doors in the film industry and they don't get in. So do you remember sort of the first ever experience you had working on a film set?
Yes, so my first job experience, I'll give you my story, but it's one that I don't advise to anyone watching this. Don't do this at home. I must have cold called, that means contacted people somewhat blindly. And I think one of the people that I contacted was an old tutor from film school. And he recommended a designer who's an American guy with considerable experience at the time. And he was working on a feature film, which at the time was really low budget. I mean, it was something like a 1 or 2 million, pound film, and to me that seemed like a huge budget. But that budget wasn't large enough to grant me any kind of payment. So I worked for free as a trainee and presenting myself and basically saying, I'll do whatever needs to be done. Had a quick exchange with the designer, got to meet the rest of the team that was already sort of right in the throes of pre-production. And the next thing that I know is I'm taken down to the prop store. I'm handed the script, schedule, all of these documents, and they sat me at a desk and they're like, read. So I sat there on the spot, read the script, and then joined as a prop assistant. And I did everything from sort of arranging the prop store to, because it was a low budget film, we did everything. So I did set dressing and the striking and the rearranging of the prop store. So you're sort of a dresser.
Can you talk about those roles a little bit? So obviously, a director has best friends, and the best friends would probably be the production designer, cinematographer, along with their, spouse, who would probably be the producer at this stage. So we're all best friends. Who works under you as a production designer? And then we can talk about our relationship.
Sure. So when you're a production designer, as you rightly said, your best friend is the director. And I would also say the cinematographer. But the cinematographer or DP in America or DOP in the UK, they tend to come on board much later in the process of pre-production. And by then, a lot of big decisions might have already been made, particularly if they get involved in the film very, very, very early on, and rightly so. And a cinematographer might not get involved until a couple of weeks before we start filming, by which time the bulk of the film might have been designed. However, going back to the question, in the art department, the key guys are the art director or art directors. If it's a big film, you'd also have a supervising art director who looks after all of the art directors, and the set decorator. There's other roles which are really important. I mean, you have a prop master, you'll have a graphic designer, you're also very much in touch with the construction team, the SFX team, and then anything like animals, vehicles, all of separate departments, but which the designer will have a very, very, very close relationship with. But within the art department, the art director and a set decorator are sort of the key core that I'd spend most of my time with.
And you get given, the film will obviously have a budget, and the budget will be allocated accordingly. The art department gets a certain chunk. How much of the film goes into production? The film's budget goes into production design. And then how do you spend that money when you have it?
I wish I could answer that question. It's a question I'd love to hear a producer give an answer to. I think every project is inherently different in how finances are allocated across the film, and also film. When I say film, I'm talking about TV, film, generically speaking. But you might need different resources for different types of film. If you're doing an epic period drama where you have to build streets and, have hundreds of extras, we're talking about, a certain budget. If you're doing a contemporary drama where you're on the location based and going into places and using sort of the backbone of what's there, it might be a different budget. But generally speaking, I don't know if this is correct, but I've always sort of heard of this in the grapevine, that I think the art department normally sort of accounts for about 10% of the, I don't know if it's the overall budget, actually, probably the, the under the line. But don't quote me on that. But that's what I've always sort of been led to believe. But that can translate as, they can be wildly different. I always say to any producer, pretty much, I always end up having this conversation. But I really believe that everything is possible. And I think that any designer has to have that sort of mindset. We're sort of magicians, as are all filmmakers, And I believe that you can do something for 500 quid and you can do something for 5 million. It could be on a piece of paper, it could be the exact same thing. And obviously the results will be wildly different. But, I think you can always achieve something.
Okay, so my next question is, you get a script, someone has written a script, the producer, hands you the script and says, okay, here it is. You start reading it. Can you talk about what you do just first of all to the script in terms of your work?
Okay, so this is I'll just cave out the question by saying that normally the designer will be sent the script before being hired onto the film officially. So what tends to happen is, well, unless you have a relationship with a director or a producer and you're definitely going to be on board a film, often it's a bit of a kind of bidding process or like an interview. So you'll be sent the script and you will go and meet the director or the producers or the showrunner, depending on the project. And you will probably prepare for the project in order to get it in the first place. Meaning that by the time that you're officially actually starting on the film, generally the adults in the room have a good idea of what it is that you're going to be doing. But anyway, going back to your question, the first thing I would do is set about establishing a clear look and feel for the project. That could be done through mood boards, for instance, or pulling together images which give a certain feeling. Is it a dark comedy? Is it something that needs to feel really light and airy? Is it going to be a really sort of gritty drama? The internet and the amount of image libraries out there, and I'm talking about online, but also physical libraries. There's so much out there. You can build a lookbook or a Bible pretty, I wouldn't say rapidly, but you can be quite precise in terms of giving someone a good sense of what you're thinking for the look of the film. And then obviously you'll have these back and forth, this dialogue with primarily the director. And once you're both happy, then you start breaking the script down and going into a more kind of technical establishing how exactly you're going to be making that film, particularly on time and on budget.
Can you talk about some of the films that you've worked on? I know you've worked on some period, you've worked on things that are vastly different. So can you talk a bit about your experiences on those, like how you broke down the script on those, and then how that translated to the set when you actually got there?
I've done dramas, I've done science fiction, I've done contemporary dark comedies, I've done historical dramas. So I've been very fortunate to work on quite a range of different films, also working domestically, but also internationally quite a bit. And every single project will encompass a completely different world that you deal with. And that's part of the craft, and actually part of the reason why I love what I do, is that every project is so different. But broadly speaking, there are obviously some common denominators to all of these projects. I would always start with a lot of research, both visual research, but also if I'm working to a particular time or period or a place, I would want to know everything about it, like everything there is to know. In biblical times, how did they eat? Um, how did they sit? What sort of furniture did they have? Did they have any furniture? What would the interiors look like? What would the exteriors look like? What would people's habits be like? How would be, you know, you'd want to know as much as possible. So that, for me, the first protocol, it's a lot of research. And even for science fiction, which is the last film that I did, I still ended up doing a vast amount of research. I spoke to advisors who were in touch with NASA projects. I looked into various, you know, um, galaxy missions, particularly at NASA, science fiction authors. So you just try and collate as much information as possible as your starting point. And you work from there. It just starts feeding in. And it's sort of like the inverted pyramid. You just start with an enormous, gargantuan amount of information, and then you start like stripping that back and becoming more and more focused on what it is that you need to tell the story and to establish the look that you want to establish.
When you have a film, you obviously have interior shoots and you have exterior shoots. So if your director decides they want to shoot at some railway station that looks great, and they visualize that and they think that that looks great for the part, would your job stop there? Would you just not touch that and not be involved with any of the of that aspect of preparing the set? Are you always doing set builds, or do you get involved on location as well?
Okay, it's a great question again. So the locations, if a film, some films are set on location, some films are pure set builds, say those big studio films, and a lot of films are somewhere in between. But I think increasingly you get a lot of films filmed out on location, and even when you're on location, that can entail a build. I've been to locations and we've built so much in the interior effectively. But that said, the locations are an absolutely critical part of the design process. So for example, when I worked on a it was a 1920s drama for filming in Ireland, and it was all going to be set on location for whatever reason. And there must have been at least 100 locations that needed to be sourced. I dedicated an enormous part of my own pre-production to just spend time location scouting with the location manager, because finding the right locations is absolutely key, vital to the production design. And actually, I'd go as far as to say that if you're going into an apartment and, absolutely stripping it, good chance you might be in the wrong location. So to take your example, if you do go to a railway station and actually you find that it is perfect, then usually that's a culmination of a lot of scouting anyway, which you've been to maybe 10 other railway stations. You pick the one which is right to tell your story. That is in itself good art direction. I think finding the right location, absolutely critical to good art direction. I can't stress that point. I think they are absolutely in tow. And then you'll always find, if you go to a railway station, chances are there's you might need to change the actual name of the station. There's loads of signage, there's loads of advertising, so you end up doing a lot of cover-up. It's very, very rare, no dressing involved whatsoever. Very, very, very rarely in my experience.
Are you allowed to do that? Are you allowed to take down signs? Or if you are shooting, for example, in the middle of London or in France in the Champs-Élysées or whichever, are you allowed to remove those signs, remove lights, remove trees in order to prepare for your film?
It really depends. It depends where you do things, and often it depends on how much money you have and how glamorous your shoot may be. You know, if you're filming happens to include Tom Cruise and you've got a film on the Champs-Élysées or on the Eurostar, well, you know, it's amazing how many doors might open for you. Um, Generally speaking, in it's very difficult because obviously, you know, they got to serve, and rightly so, the public. So even shutting down the odd street, what happens is there's certain areas which become well known for like filming locations, which tend to be film friendly, which get used a lot. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's a conversation, and as a designer, I constantly find myself harassing the location manager with all sorts of requests. Can we remove these bollards? Can I put a tree here? Can I remove these benches? Can we cover up this sign? And you work collaboratively and you find a way. And in the worst case, if you can't, and you absolutely can't show something, but you have to go off director and say, look, you know, we absolutely can't frame this. Is there any way we can, you know, just change the framing of the camera slightly? There's always ways. There's always solutions.
And so this obviously these questions, these things will come up when you have meetings with both the director, cinematographer, DP, whichever. So how many of these meetings do you have? When do they start? How long are you in pre-production? And how much time do you spend with these people?
How long is a piece of string? It's as a designer, and I think every designer would say this, you cannot get involved early enough. So you always want to be involved as early as possible. Some productions can be really good about it. Like I know in TV, sometimes a designer can be hired before there's even a director. You actually start devising a look and you don't know who the director is. But you have as many meetings as possible, and try and discuss things as much as possible. And I see that really as part of the designer's job, is to communicate what it is that one is trying to do. So yeah, absolutely. From the outset, I will be meeting the director and trying to extract from them what they want to do. What do they want to give the story? How do they want the audience to feel? What does a character mean? What sort of emotive quality does the scene have? Why is the scene in? I mean, sometimes I'll be asking really rudimentary questions about the script. You know, what's the importance of this story beat? And you try and sort of evoke all of these emotions and qualities visually.
What is the longest and shortest time you spent in pre-production?
Um, well, the longest, what films can do, and again, I'm erring when I say this, is there's sometimes a discrepancy between the moment production designer is contacted and the time in which they will formally be engaged on a film, which means in that sort of hiatus or in that period, unless you're working on another project, there is time to do what I think gets called a soft prep, which is not official. You haven't signed the contract, or maybe you have, but you know, you might not necessarily be on the payroll, but your cogs are ticking, you're having many meetings, many conversations, whether it's Skype calls or in coffee shops, and you're drawing because, you know, that's what we do. Our minds, once we start getting into a project, we start just thinking about it all the time. So if you take that into effect, The science fiction film, which I did um, last late last year, I would have had conversations about that a year beforehand already, at least. Uh, already coming up with some concept designs, ideas, mood boards, conversations. So that's probably the longest I've had. And then the formal pre-production of that will had about 10, 10 weeks of official prep, maybe a bit more. The minimum I've had uh, I'd say the minimum I've had, and again, this is not what anyone wants to hear, is about 3 weeks. So there's been a couple of TV shows where I've had 3 weeks. There's one show which came from the US, an American show that was primarily filming over there. And then we're filming in Europe for a month, and we went to film in Spain and Italy, in Holland and in the UK. And I was the designer in Europe. And I think I had 3 weeks to prepare that. And that entailed quickly, like running around all over and quickly putting together a map and a look and a plan for each place, as well as finding local art departments in each country. That was pretty manic.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to discuss as well, because I know that you've shot internationally. You shot in Morocco, for example, and you don't know these people. So basically, they take you, they plonk you in a new country, and they go, "We're building something." So it's up to you, right, to go off and speak to the people in charge, to find construction workers, to find people who can craft and build, to find people who have the props, to go to the stores, to kind of find the furniture that you need, et cetera, et cetera. What's that like?
That's right. It's stressful. Look, it's a real challenge, and it's also really part of the beauty of what we do. Yes, you're right that everywhere you go, you have to work with, and rightly so, with local teams. You're better off working with the local teams to know the lay of the land and how the system operates. Every country has slightly different ways of achieving results, and every place, depending on its own, they bring their own history and culture to a project, might do things in the most incredible ways. Morocco, as you described, they had the most incredible plasterers. I never imagined it. I mean, their plastering team, we had a team of plasterers, and they were just of the highest talent. Something which I think what they achieved there with plaster it's remarkable compared to what I've seen in the UK. But then you might have other areas in Morocco where they'd be considered to be quite lacking. You need to adapt, and you need to. I also see that again as part of the job. Really, is if you're going to a foreign country and then you're going to use a bunch of materials and design processes which are completely alien to the local culture, it might not be such a good idea. It might be a good idea to sort of verse yourself in what's already available and what the talent pool excels at locally. But yes, finding local team is really difficult and stressful, and feels like a game of musical chairs where you get onto a lot of Skype interviews and you meet people like this over a screen. You have a conversation with them, you discuss the project, and you need to very quickly get a sense if you have a good feeling with them, if you can get along.
There are times where the people who work for you, and we find this often on the set, we don't get along with everyone on set. And really, it is about being a team player and being part of that group of people. So you want to ensure that you have the best people on board. So for me, for example, if I've hired you as a production designer because I know you, because I've worked with you before, or I like you, or I'm comfortable with you, you're going to hire your own people. There are people that I don't maybe like. I might clash with them on set, but then again, I probably would not be interacting with them on set as a director. But for you, what if you've hired, 20 Moroccan plasterers, and you know only 5 of them decide to show up because 15 of them have decided they just don't like you, just they don't want to be there or whatnot. How do you tackle problems like that as they happen? Because as we say, anything that can go wrong on set usually does go wrong.
Look, it's a difficult one, and you're right that you don't. It's like a numbers game. That if you have 100 people on the team, there's always going to be certain people that you're not going to get along with. But I think you have to find the common ground, remain professional. Uh, have the conversation if you need to. Generally, you don't, but that you're all a team. And the reason that that person's on the film as well as yourself is because you have the exact same motive. You're both working, and you're both there to create a film. Ultimately, you're not paying people to be their friends. You're paying them to do a job. And I think if they're doing that job, then yeah, the rest is just about having to maybe put a bit of a distance or an emotional barrier, which I think is, that's fine. Of course, I've had experiences where, unfortunately, a certain person in my team might be very difficult to work with. And look, it's a challenge. What can I say? But I think one always tries to strive to find a solution and to find common ground. The situation, I would think that an open conversation. You can also do it outside of work. Go out, grab a dinner together, have a drink, and just chat things through. You're all there to make a film together. And the other thing with filmmaking tends to be quite short. You're on a film set for what, a few weeks. So, it's not like you're lumbered with a person for years and years. It's time is short.
Okay, and just to conclude, I mean, we've talked about the qualities you need to be a production designer. You've got to be a bit creative or artsy. You need to keep a level head. You might be handy if you can speak a few languages. I mean, you speak a bit of Arabic, which is why you manage as well in Morocco, right? So you've got all these qualities, and
Well,
then knowing a lot of people.
I
No,
would just
you
say a
do.
little bit about it.
No, you do. And so and you've got all those qualities. So what other qualities do you need, and what does it take to be a production designer? Do you have any advice for people who want to get into it?
Sure. I think production design, probably along with directing, maybe a little bit less. I mean, we encompass such a huge world. Construction, props, set dressing, architecture, graphic design. There's so many areas to the art department, such a broad department. That different designers have different strengths and weaknesses. So there isn't really like a right or wrong approach in a way. I mean, I know that they have an incredible knowledge of construction, and I know designers who come from much more of an illustration background, and they might have a great sense of composition and color. Some might come from more of a costume background, or graphic design, or even model making or drafting. There's a lot of, and it's very rare, maybe even impossible, I don't know, to meet someone who's like an absolute master of all the crafts, because there's so many. And increasingly now, there's a lot of VFX, and a lot of VFX and sets are increasingly merged together. So it's something that's ever like expanding and changing. But I would say that all designers generally, yeah, I mean, of course, you need to be creative. I think that's a given, but I think that designers deal with really strict sort of timelines and budgets, and pressures to deliver something on time, and that requires a sort of a bit of a logistical and practical brain. So I'd say the production designer actually really needs to be someone who's like highly efficient and reliable. Obviously has good taste, although that's harder to sort of cipher because, you know, good taste to me or to you might be very different to a good taste to someone else. But that's often why designers and directors will work or collaborate with similar teams to sort of develop a shorthand. And then the other thing which I think a designer has to have is honestly, I love knowledge. I love history. I love culture. I try and go and see every show and every film. I mean, you know, obviously that's impossible, but I'm forever reading about, um, you know, primarily history, architecture, uh, design, but also looking at things outside of design, you know, whatever. I mean, I think just a great knowledge and curiosity of the world around you.
I think we've covered it for today. Thank you so much for joining us, Noam.
Fantastic. Well, it's been a great pleasure, and those are great questions. So I hope that's helpful.